Today, we're going to unravel what I think is the ultimate media mystery, how society actually lost its cognitive capacity to care about reality. We're going to track a really profound shift in human psychology over the last century. We'll look at how we went from a society that basically believed everything it heard to a society so exhausted by algorithms it literally no longer has the bandwidth to care. Okay, let's dive right into this massive historical contradiction. Picture this. In one corner, you have 1938. A purely fictional radio broadcast about alien invaders supposedly terrifies an entire nation, sending people fleeing into the streets. Then, in the other corner, you have today. Highly credentialed military officials are testifying under oath to the United States Congress about non-human intelligence and crashed crafts, and we collectively shrug. We just scroll right past it. So, why don't we care anymore, right? It's a really profound sociological paradox. And to solve it, we can't just look at the present. We've got to travel back to an era when media commanded absolute uncritical trust. Part 1. Wells and Narrative Faming. To understand our 1938 baseline, we really have to look at Orson Welles. He was this absolute prodigy, and his early fascination with magic tricks became the foundation for how he'd manipulate reality for the rest of his life. His evolution was incredibly rapid. He started out by subverting traditional narratives in avant-garde theater, directing highly politicized, boundary-pushing plays by the time he was just 21. Then, he takes that subversive energy straight to mass radio, establishing this kind of trickster persona that played with what the audience expected. Finally, he moves to Hollywood, pioneering cinematic illusions in Citizen Kane. He used techniques like deep focus photography that deliberately forced the audience to actively scan the frame and interpret reality for themselves. He was basically teaching people how to see and, more importantly, how to be fooled. Part 2. The Psychology of Trust. That mastery of narrative illusion perfectly set the stage for October 30, 1938. Wells and his team didn't just casually read H.G. Wells's The War of the Worlds. They deliberately structured the first 30 minutes as a faux breaking news broadcast. It was literally a masterclass in oral hyperrealism. They used excruciatingly long, mundane piano solos that would get abruptly interrupted by increasingly frantic bulletins. They used real place names, like Grover's Mill, New Jersey, to anchor the fiction in reality. They even had actors meticulously study the real-life panicked vocal cadence, the raw, trembling emotion of the reporter who covered the actual Hindenburg disaster. They essentially lured the audience into cognitive complacency by perfectly mimicking the exact sounds and rhythms of reality. But actually, scratch that assumed history, because here's a massive plot twist about that legendary night. Modern research proves the huge nationwide panic was largely a myth. Studies by media scholars show that the early data was fundamentally flawed. It categorized anyone who was merely excited or curious as being in a state of literal panic. In reality, the exaggerated headlines of mass hysteria were largely driven by a threatened print newspaper industry. They were completely desperate to discredit this new, rapidly growing, competing medium of radio. So, the absolutely crucial takeaway here is this. The localized confusion that did occur wasn't a result of human gullibility. As media scholars noted, people believed in the absolute authority of the CBS radio network's formatting. The abrupt interruption of music, the authoritative study cadence of supposed experts, the medium itself carried an unassailable guarantee of truth. The public wasn't necessarily buying into Martians, right? They were buying into the trusted structure of broadcast news. Part 3. The Evolution of Gatekeeping. Following that 1938 broadcast, the sheer psychological power of mass media became undeniably clear. And this brings us to a massive paradigm shift in how we consume reality. For decades, we relied on pre-digital institutional gatekeeping. Identifiable human editors filtered the news based on professional judgment, ethics, and democratic values. It fostered unified narratives, for better or worse. But today, we live in the era of modern algorithmic curation. Opaque machine learning architectures have completely replaced those human editors. And here's the real catch. Algorithms don't care about truth. They are designed solely to optimize for raw engagement, virality, and polarization, feeding us absolutely whatever keeps our eyes glued to the glass. Every single time you open an app, you are stepping into a fierce political and cultural struggle over who actually controls reality. As traditional human gatekeepers lost their absolute monopoly over information, incumbent institutions and massive tech platforms began to frequently frame alternative viewpoints as an epidemic of misinformation to maintain their status quo. Conversely, populist challengers and independent voices argue that this label has just become a weapon of censorship, used to arbitrarily dismiss objective grassroots reporting. It's a constant, exhausting tug of war for epistemological authority. Think about your own social media feeds and everyday conversations. This brings us to a really fascinating sociological concept happening right in our own neighborhoods. It's called the sense of misinformation, or SOM. Because our digital environment is so hyper-politicized, people are increasingly conditioned to view mere disagreements or inconvenient data as malicious deception. Even when absolutely no falsehood is involved, the opposing side is immediately labeled as spreading misinformation. This dynamic completely fractures community trust, isolates us into our own little bubbles, and breaks down basic civic discourse.
Part 4. Diagnosing Information Fatigue.
Okay, this broken, deeply cynical trust landscape perfectly sets up the UAP paradox we talked about at the start of this explainer. Between 2023 and 2025, the House Oversight Committee held landmark hearings. We had highly credentialed military whistleblowers like David Grush testifying under oath about classified, multi-decade crash retrieval programs and the recovery of non-human biologics. Pilots Ryan Graves and David Fravor detailed objects demonstrating flight capabilities far beyond human technology. We even had revelations of unacknowledged special access programs like Immaculate Constellation, allegedly holding high-resolution evidence. These are profound, literally paradigm-shifting claims that shatter our fundamental understanding of physics and our place in the universe. Yet, what actually happened? Did we freak out? No. Instead of experiencing what sociologists call a world-shattering ontological shock, society simply disengaged. We experienced ontological fracturing. The general public reacted with profound apathy, staggering indifference, and outright mockery. Major legacy publications just casually dismissed it, and the overarching cultural consensus was basically, nobody cares. So how did we get here? To solve our central mystery, why the public shrugged at under oath testimony about aliens while supposedly panicking over a radio play a century ago, we are going to diagnose this modern psychological condition using 3 distinct pillars of media theory. First up, we look at classic information theory, pioneered by Claude Shannon back in 1948. It centers on the signal-to-noise ratio. In 1938, information was scarce. The signal was clear and authoritative. Today, we suffer from terminal information overload. Just think about your own phone. The profound signal of existential reality, like military officials testifying about non-human intelligence, is algorithmically flattened. It occupies the exact same digital space, the exact same visual weight, as a viral meme, an influencer apology, or a 30-second cooking video. The profound signal is entirely degraded by the endless noise. Second, we have French sociologist Jean Baudrillard's theory of hyperreality. Baudrillard argued that our dense culture of simulation has essentially replaced objective meaning. Because the global public has been absolutely saturated with decades of high-budget CGI aliens and super sophisticated digital sci-fi blockbusters, the actual bureaucratic reality of a government whistleblower sitting at a mundane desk with a microphone feels entirely synthetic. It feels derivative. The Hollywood simulation has preemptively consumed the real thing, leaving us ironically incapable of feeling genuine awe or shock when the truth finally does arrive. And finally, we turn to theorist Byung-Chul Han, who identifies information fatigue. Han argues that the constant, unrelenting influx of algorithmic data fundamentally exhausts our human cognitive capacity. After surviving global pandemics, endlessly polarized politics, economic anxieties, and the constant weaponization of those misinformation labels we talked about, profound apathy is actually a necessary psychological defense mechanism. Our exhausted minds literally lack the residual bandwidth to process paradigm-shifting truths, even when they are delivered straight to us under oath. We just want to swipe to the next video. This brings us to a pretty sobering conclusion. The evolution from the 1938 radio panic to today's algorithmic indifference shows a complete inversion of how we process truth. When the architecture of our belief is perpetually manipulated both by institutional self-preservation and the relentless churn of algorithmic virality, the ultimate casualty isn't just the objective truth. It's our psychological capacity to care about it in the first place. Which leaves us with one final, kind of unsettling question to reflect on regarding your own digital media consumption. If we can collectively shrug at the prospect of non-human intelligence, what else are we missing right now simply because we are too exhausted to notice? Think about it. Thanks for joining me on this explainer and keep questioning what's in your feed.